Everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we'll just wait a couple more minutes for the panelists to join. All right. Well, hey everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Nicole. I'm a third year medical student at UCLA. Tonight we're going to talk about finding your passion in medicine and which path is right for you. It seems like our two panelists have not joined yet, which is okay. I can just share my experiences, so this might be a more informal type of night. So please feel free at any point to just, stop me, ask any questions you guys have. You can also feel free to put questions in the chat. If that's more comfortable, there's an anonymous way you can send them through the chat. But yeah, so we'll just start out with a few of the questions you guys submitted beforehand. So the first question was, when did you first realize you wanted to pursue medicine? And was there a specific, experience or moment that confirmed that medicine was right for you? So for me, I grew up kind of in a very scientific household. So my mom is a cardiologist and my dad is also in the sciencey field. He's like a researcher. So I was always around science. So I considered medicine from a young age, although I saw how hard my mom worked and how many hours she put in as a cardiologist. So I was actually trying to convince myself not to go into medicine in college. I was like, if I could just find anything else that, piques my interest, I should probably pursue that just because I knew how many hours she put in. But through a lot of different experiences, I ultimately came more comfortable in my choice to pursue medicine. I think maybe one of the defining moments for me was I was able to basically work in a hospital in Ghana, Africa, which was a really awesome experience. I was able to stay there for a couple months where I formed like really close-knit connections with my host family that I was staying with and with a lot of people I was working with in the hospital. And I just got to see healthcare from a different perspective, and kind of see how their healthcare system works. So that was really kind of transformative for me. Um, let's see. I'm gonna try to open this up since I guess I'm the only panelist at this point. Do you guys have any specific questions so far, that you wanted to bring up? Feel free again to put them in the chat or just unmute yourself. We can make this super informal if you guys just want to chat as well. Alrighty, I'll just keep going, but feel free to stop me with any questions at any point. Um, so did I ever have any doubts about choosing medicine and how did I address them? Yes, of course. I've always had a lot of doubts about choosing medicine. As I said before, I kind of knew it would be, a very hard field to go into. Obviously, everyone always tells you, um, there's it's medical school can be really hard, and then you go through residency, and then sometimes you even do fellowship before practicing as an attending physician. So, I doubted myself going through that whole process and just my ability to make it through. But I will say, I think the hardest part about it so far was actually my pre-med experience in undergrad. I think the classes were just objectively harder, like orgo, physics, etc. And in med school, the content is not as difficult to grasp. It's just the amount of content that you have to learn is a lot. Um, okay, and then someone put in the chat, what specialty are you interested in now, and has it changed throughout med school? So for me, I'm very interested in dermatology. The summer before med school, I was just kind of like researching lots of different, potential specialties. I like made a whole spreadsheet, like, okay, what if I applied into anesthesia? What would my life look like? And I kind of would Google as much as I could, to try to figure out like what my life would like look like in these different specialties. And then I really tried to see if those specific specialties would be good for me long term. And then once I had my little list, I tried to shadow physicians in those specialties before med school, which I think was extremely helpful. Um, and ultimately, I ended up shadowing a dermatologist, and really just enjoyed watching them do Mohs surgery, which is a specific type of skin cancer surgery. And I think it's just super interesting how you can basically close skin wounds, and you can kind of do it in a creative way. So I really like that aspect. And I also like just Gen Derm in general. It looks like one of our panelists has joined. Hey Ryan, thanks for joining.
Hello, sorry
I
for the
I think for
delay.
now it's just me and you, and Autrine's gonna hop on a bit later.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry
Yeah,
about the delay.
no worries. If you wanted to answer this one as well, which I just answered, just so they have another perspective, is when did you first realize that you wanted to pursue medicine, and was there like a defining moment for you that really solidified that?
Yeah, so I guess as a little bit of a disclaimer, I'm an MD PhD student, so the answer might be slightly different. But essentially through college, I was faced with a dilemma that I would have to do either medicine or science. And it was a very challenging dilemma to face because I loved both equally. I had a very difficult time deciding, and it wasn't until actually sophomore year when I skipped class, which I don't necessarily condone, but opportunities can present themselves at the most unlikely and inconvenient of times. I skipped class and ended up attending a lecture from an MD PhD, who was working on microelectronics for cancer, which essentially blended all the different fields that I was interested in. So that was probably like the landmark event that pointed me towards the path I was on today. But I guess more specifically for medicine, I think there's always been just a fascination with the human body and the intricacies of how it works. I never realized until more recently in my actually PhD phase right now that surgeon type career paths were a possibility for me. But I think looking back, it's now actually quite clear that I always had that fascination with like working with my hands, building things, that kind of thing. So I don't know if there was a specific event that got me started in medicine alone, but I think it's just been a slow burn of, interest and the fascination with the complexity of the human body.
Yeah, thanks. And then another more specific question is, do you have a specific specialty in mind that you're interested in pursuing, and how did you come to be interested in that specialty?
Yeah, so radiation oncology was actually the kind of top choice through undergrad as well as the first couple of years of med school. And that was in sort of stemmed from a number of different areas. One is sort of my family has been personally touched by, the impacts of cancer, so that was a more personal factor. But also on the scientific level, I think I had always been really interested in kind of the arms race between our current technological advances and the defense mechanisms that cancer has. And so I kind of wanted to be at the forefront of, a treatment modality that was, constantly evolving, constantly, improving itself and advancing itself and on the pioneering cutting edge of what we could do. And I had actually incidentally shadowed a radiation oncologist in my undergrad period, and it was just fascinating the types of things they were working with. They had all sorts of names to different machines like gamma knife and all of that. And it was very interesting to see everything from the treatment plan of, the residents, the physicians all building this, intricate contouring mechanism to, outline the tumors and how to deliver the treatment, all the way to seeing actual instrument itself, like the gantry, this massive thing just sort of floating around the patient doing its thing. So that was actually my first love in terms of medical specialties. And then actually over the course of the last, couple of years in the PhD, right now, I work in a lab that develops immunotherapy for brain cancer. And part of that involves working with your hands to, do little miniature mouse brain surgery. And I fell in love with that. And so far right now, neurosurgery is thus looking at the top as the top choice. So we'll see once I get to the clinical rotation period if that changes, but that's currently the one.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Sounds like you're really interested in some very cool things and have some awesome research going on too. So for the next question, it is, did you know you were interested in your specific specialty before med school, and how has your interest in different specialties changed throughout time? So I'll go ahead and start just to give you a little bit of a break. Um, so as I said before, I'm very interested in dermatology, and I did have that experience where I shadowed the Mohs skin cancer surgeon and was really kind of inspired just by their surgical techniques and all the different cool closures that you can do. So that definitely piqued my interest before med school, but I wouldn't say I was completely set on it. During med school, there's usually one full year of clerkships or clinical rotations. And so I really tried to keep my mind as open as possible during all of those to really see if I could see myself in that field long term. And I definitely had a lot of fun on clerkships, and they were tough. And I could have seen myself in different fields. For instance, OB-GYN is, super cool because you get to deliver babies. You also get to, perform surgeries on women if you're interested in that. So yeah, all these different, specialties during clerkships were very interesting, but ultimately, um, I don't know, I kept with dermatology just because, yeah, I can see myself most in that field long term. Okay, I'll pass it to you, Ryan.
Sure. Yeah, I guess my previous answer kind of alluded a little bit, but I didn't come in initially thinking, neurosurgery, which is my current choice, was the way to go. And so I think the lesson to take from that is a common one, whether it's, the theme of undergrad changing your major, which incidentally I also kept flip-flopping between, or whatnot. But I think the main takeaway I'd give is that oftentimes we have an idea of what we want to do. And sometimes for some people, what you come in dreaming about is the thing that you end up in, and it never changes. But for a good chunk of people, it's also the case that there's something not on your radar at all that just hits you out of left field. So keep your mind open, as Nicole was just saying, welcome the experiences of different clinical rotations, test, the different specialties, because there might be one that's not on your radar at all that you then experience a little bit of and you can't get any more of. I think there was one physician I remember talking to who had like he never heard of anesthesiology as like a specialty before when he was training. And he kind of scoffed at it too when he first heard it about it. Because he was like, oh, this is just a bunch of math. Like you have to calculate doses on the fly, and like, you're responsible for a patient like staying under during like really complex procedures. So both before knowing it was a thing and then after knowing it was a thing, there wasn't even kind of an interest there. And then it wasn't until he tried it and, did a month-long elective or something that, couldn't see himself doing anything else. So long story short, welcome the opportunities of different specialties, give them a try because you never know what might happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's great advice. Next question is there anything you wish someone had told you when you were first considering medicine? I think for me, I heard a lot of, negatives when I told people I was considering medicine, a lot of attendings saying, are you sure this is a really hard field? It's going to take a really long time. And you really have to be passionate about it and love it and make sure there's not anything else that you want to do besides medicine before committing. And to some degree, you know, I I align with that. I do think medicine is a very hard field, but I do think also that there's a lot of positives, and I have found personally a lot of enjoyment along the way as well. And I don't think that's talked about as much. So I do wish someone had told me that there was also going to be time, like first year of med school, for instance, to hang out with friends and like make new friends. Time to still do things that you love. Like, for me, dance sometimes is, an activity that I love doing. So there's definitely time to do other things outside of medicine, and it doesn't have to become your whole life. So I would also consider that. Ryan, how about you?
That's a great question. Maybe I'll cheat and give two answers. So the first bit of advice, which actually I think is quite related to what Nicole was just describing, is I think there's this idea, especially for people contemplating, is medicine correct, like the correct path for me or whatnot. There's this idea and maybe misconception that this has to be something that you just feel this fiery passion for from deep within every day, every minute, every second. And I think for some people that is the case, but for some people it's not. And that doesn't mean that if it's not the case, you aren't cut out or can't do medicine. I think a very harsh reality that I have increasingly become subjected to and realize is with medicine, and this is a double-edged sword, you get to feel the extremes of both sides of the emotional spectrum. You get to feel the amazing rush of treating a patient, engaging with the patient, talking with them and their family as, administer curative therapies, or you make a difference, even if it's something small, like, I'm going to, call in this medication that you've been having trouble getting. You get to experience that side, the positive side of medicine. But at the same time, you have to get ready for the negative sides too, or the harsh days, the ones where, you know, there might be nothing you can do for a patient, and you have to tell them that there might be, just slam after slam cases and cases of things where nothing seems to go right, or they're just like this really sort of negative aura about everything, and those are going to come too. So I think to tangibly, capture that in one statement would be medicine is something where you have to be ready to experience the full brunt of the emotional spectrum, both positive and negative. And I think when applying, I had this sort of naive idea, like, oh, I'm going to help people. I'm ready to, make that step to, make the world a better place. But I don't think it was until I started doing some like real clinical activities in a preceptorship where you could start to see just how much it impacts you. So that would be the first bit to realize. And the second bit, I think, is also kind of related to what Nicole is describing too, is that there's this misconception that medicine must be like the single thing that dominates your life. and there's no room for anything else, which is not the case. It's challenging sometimes to make room for other things, but the key is time management and being able to, make time for the things that you want to do. So I think those are kind of two little broad misconceptions that a lot of people might have about medicine. And so to summarize, you don't need to feel a fiery passion of rage for medicine every second of every day. You will, be able to experience the full emotional spectrum of what it has to offer. And so that might diminish the rage or the passion to some days. And the second thing is, time management, be on top of things where you can so you can dedicate time to the things that you want.
Yeah, that was a great response. And then I think maybe we should answer a few of these questions in the chat. This one is specific to MD PhDs. So very nice that we have you here, Ryan. So what advice slash things would you recommend for an MD PhD as someone who's not sure between medicine and research?
Such a good question. So I'll start off by saying I feel like every MD PhD I know, both in training and after the fact, at some point questions their decision. And I think this advice applies to people in medicine with MD tracks as well. You, I have never come across a person who, is on this, long road of training, MD or MD PhD, and had no point in that training of, oh, I am questioning whether, medicine or whatnot is correct for me. Every single person has that in my experience. So I think if you have any of that right now, that doesn't mean that this path might not be for you. And so the best way to start to see where, your interests lie for a future career, I think is really to just get in contact with people, find and hunt down MD, PhD, faculty if you can, arrange a little coffee chat, talk to them about their day, see what their day-to-day is like. And also see what the day-to-day is like amongst people from different specialties. So an MD PhD lifestyle can look very different for someone in, say, neurosurgery versus someone who's doing, radiation oncology versus someone who's doing maybe dermatology. So the lifestyle and, the split between research and medicine can look very different. And so I think the question to ask yourself as you begin that path is, do I see myself doing these things in a way where I will feel unfulfilled, like not to my fullest potential if I can't do both at the same time? That's not to say you can never do both. If you have an MD or a PhD, I guess you can't treat patients with a PhD, but I think the people who find the need to go down the MD PhD path are the ones who can't at all envision their life without research. And like their ambition might be to, run a lab in the future or something like that. But I will say you do not need a PhD to be able to do clinical research, to do non-clinical research like translational basic science research. You do not need a PhD in order to start your own lab. So I think it's a little bit of a self-contradiction sometimes. It's like, why go to the point of like doing a PhD if you don't need one necessarily to do all these things? I think the benefit is you get to get a very specialized, dedicated period of training to think about science. So a little bit of a diluted answer perhaps, but if you have more questions, maybe we can chat offline in another meeting too.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Yeah, I do want to say too, like he was saying, you can still do research as an MD. You can integrate it pretty significantly in your career. Although people who do pursue MD PhDs tend to have a more research focused career. At least that's what I've heard from mentors, more like 80% research, like 20% clinical. So like one day of, clinical, like clinic, for instance, on Mondays, and then Tuesday through Friday might be research for you. But you can kind of customize it how you like as well. Some people do 60-40, 50-50. But yeah, you don't necessarily need a PhD, but like he says, like Ryan said, it could be very helpful for you, just defining the area that you really want to research, getting more experience, and that sort of thing. But yeah, okay. So another question is, how do you maintain your passion for medicine during challenging times in undergrad and also med school? So for instance, the MCAT, taking hard classes, etc. For me, I think as a pre-med, I was pretty dedicated to medicine. Um, so I was, but I definitely had doubts as well. So I would definitely I'd keep my head down and I was like studying really hard. Um, but I think especially with studying for the MCAT, that like almost broke me. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a big test. I don't know how I'm ever gonna finish this. But if you really just stay motivated, you can finish it. I think one of the best pieces of advice I got from I think my brother was actually, thousands of people have done this before you. Thousands of people will do it after. You are very smart, as I'm sure are all of you, and you can do it as well. So, yes. So that's what I tell myself during the challenging times, is that a lot of people have already done this, and I can do it too. And then the same thing goes for my medical school career so far. I think the most challenging time for me during medical school was my clerkship year. Um, because when you're doing your clerkship year, you often work, 6 out of the 7 days in a week. And it can be very tiring because you might have to be at the hospital at, 6 a.m. and you might leave at 6 p.m., for instance, and then you have to go home and study. So during those times, I was definitely, questioning my career in medicine, if this, if I would be able to keep this up long term, and things like that. But I will say that that clerkship year is very condensed for the purpose of learning in medical school. And in most specialties, it will not always be that condensed, Your life as an attending will look very different than your life as a medical student and your life as a resident. So I would also keep that in mind. Ryan, any tips?
Yeah, I think that covers it pretty well. I think returning to the passion about what brought you there in the first place can be a really good strategy. There's one patient example in my mind that constantly kind of fuels the fire under me to continue on, which was essentially really, really short story. In my shadowing experience in undergrad there, I was in the radiation oncology department watching a PET scan being administered, and there's just this really loud bell tolling in the distance, and I thought this was an alarm that I needed to go check out. So I went out to look, and there was this, kind, elderly man ringing the bell very vigorously on the wall, and I was not sure what it was at all. Long story short, it turns out that is the bell you ring when you complete your cancer therapy regimen there. And it was incredibly impactful for me to see that and learn, and for this man to tell me that he wanted me to be in a picture with him when I had no idea who he was. He had no idea who I was, but I was there at the moment with him, celebrating the completion of his medical treatment. So I think having, those in your back pocket to, remind you why you do this in the first place can be a really good way to go. Especially when, you hit the grueling MCAT run, when you hit the, grueling times of maybe even the first couple years of med school where you just get fire hose of information, as they often call it. So remind yourself of the good of the the motivations underlying everything that got you started.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And then we also have another panelist who just joined us, Atrine. If you want to introduce yourself, and then you can go ahead and answer the question that we both just answered, which is, how do you maintain your passion for medicine during very challenging times? And this can be, undergrad, pre-med classes, or during med school.
Hi everyone, I'm Atrine, third year medical student. I'm originally from the Bay Area, here in LA. Don't want to be super redundant. Sorry again, I'm late. But I think what keeps me going, it's pretty similar to what when I joined in, when Ryan was saying, it's like kind of like my why. Because medicine, in my viewpoint, is more something you do as like a career. It's not just a job. And it's very easy when things start to feel mundane for me and things start to feel like I'm just like doing something that I could have like basically like sent a CV out to and like not have gone down the medical path to burn me out. And looking back, especially for more applicable advice just for being an undergraduate, I think I would pick activities that really fill your cup. Because the things that you enjoy are the ones that you're going to give your most energy towards. You're probably going to be a big superstar by doing activities you that fill you rather than things that might look good on your CV. I think it's just very easy to feel pressure to like do 15, 20 different things so that you look as strong as possible on paper. And I mean, that's the goal. Everybody wants to get into medical school. It's ridiculously competitive. It's not a secret, but I do think that like people who become successful towards the end can maintain their sense of like why always are the ones that like pick things in their lives that really like keep them going. So I hope that makes sense and that's not too like long-winded, but it's kind of like my answer.
Yeah, no, that was a really good answer. Thanks, Atrine. And then the next question is, what role did mentorship play in helping you explore the different specialties? So for me, I think mentorship played a pretty significant role. So the dermatologist that I was telling you guys about before, that I shadowed the summer before medical school, he was just very involved in my learning. And so it was always so much fun to like go to clinic with him because he would always, describe everything and go through treatment plans and he was so invested in my journey as well because, he gave me his contact information. He was like, if there's anything I can do to help you, get into med school or like on this journey to become a dermatologist, let me know. So it almost like gave me the confidence that I needed to like pursue my journey. And yeah, I think throughout med school as well, I've had many mentors that really kind of helped solidify my choice and specialty. Um, and I think one of the biggest parts is I always, enjoy talking to the people within my field of choice as well. And I always just like enjoy going to clinic and things like that. So those things also help me solidify my specialty choice. Let's see. Maybe Ryan, if you want to take a chance at that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll say that my mentors, of course, they sort of got me into certain specialties over time. But I think the finding of the specialty has a little bit more been a result of my explorations and experiences. But the power of mentorship is something you cannot overlook at all. So the undergrad experience that I had with shadowing, I was at UC Berkeley for undergrad, and the MD PhD that I had talked about earlier, who kind of inspired me to pursue that pathway in sophomore year. Incidentally, I asked if I could, participate in clinical care research with him and shadow him. And he was the one who took the time to, walk me through every single part of what medicine was like for a day in the life for him. And that was not just, a chat about, okay, I wake up at this time, I go here for this, tumor board meeting, and then I go over here to see patients for consults. It was, come with me. Let's take a look at what this is like. And then any breaks that he could, which sometimes, as many times a day, sometimes the clinical obligations, make it hard. But every opportunity that presented itself for a teaching moment, he took that. And he would walk through, this is how we draw, little lines around patients' tumors. And this is how these lines translate to treatment plans. And so for me, who did not have experience with that at all, um, it seemed a little like, wow, I didn't know they went out of their way to this degree. Like I thought it was just, stand in a corner, watch what happens, but don't get in the way. Entirely opposite situation. I was in the thick of it. I actually got to help make a treatment plan for a patient. I was under the supervision of a resident and they signed off finally on it. So I was not as an unlicensed individual making a plan. But I got to, draw some of those lines on an MRI and it was the coolest thing in the world. So having mentors, finding mentors who will take that time and be invested in you, like Nicole just said, is really, really important. This MD PhD very kindly writes letters, like rec letters to me to this very day. So, maintaining those relationships is really, really important. And, going out and finding those people is also really important. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work. You gotta, get your foot in the door and then find people who might match your learning style a little bit better. But it's really, really important to find those mentors.
Yeah, Atrine, you can also talk about your journey to how you decided on a specialty as well as how mentorship may have impacted that decision.
Um, I guess like yeah, similar to Ryan, like it's funny, it's like in parallel, like my specialty decision wasn't fully driven by mentorship. It was like more like specific to like I'm interested in orthopedic surgery, so like it was more specific towards like the medicine itself of like being able to give people their life back, whether they can walk again, throw again, use their arm again. And I think my mentor in part like inspires me just because of how phenomenal he is, like as a human being, because he's an orthopedic oncologist, so he's doing limb salvage surgeries, preventing like amputations and but that glamorous stuff aside, I think like drawing back to my mentor in my gap years, and like I also think like just the best mentors I've ever had always are people who are insanely invested in me as a person and undeniably compassionate. I remember when I first met my first research mentor in my gap years at Stanford. He read my CV to give me advice and told me it was terrible and it was like I had no chance of getting into med school. Like he was fully honest. And then he was like, "But I'm not trying to discourage you. I just don't want you to apply and not get anywhere." And through that, like then, he took me on as his research assistant, was like, "I want to give you like all these projects so you can get in." And I think like in a culture where medicine feels hyper competitive and there's a lot of like, gatekeeping and like very toxic behaviors that are the stigmas behind like entering these environments, for him to be like the antithesis, whatever the word is, like basically the opposite of that, was very inspiring for me and made me look for that wherever I went. Be mainly because I noticed that's where the breeding ground of success really lies in for your goals and your future. Um, is just for people who are like ultra collaborative and caring. And so I think like the best like thing I can try to leave everyone with that I wish I knew when I was like in my 1920s, like as an undergrad, is to just like let mentorship be an organic relationship and find people who care about you. I think like the other like I think like that will probably like yield the best returns, especially when they read your rec letters for medical school. They're not necessarily looking for who wrote your letter. That's more of like a residency thing. I think more in applying to med school, it's like how well do they know you and are you like the most outstanding student they've seen in X amount of years? And that can only happen if you guys like both like made that bond. And for me, like that did drive like part of like where I ended up in different areas. So sorry, I'm not directly answering the specialty portion, but that's like the mentorship part of the question.
Yeah, thanks, Otrine. And I also wanted to just kind of echo what you said about the medicine, obviously being a very important aspect to why you were interested in orthopedic surgery. So for me, the medicine of dermatology is also just fascinating to me, like the immune system in the skin causing inflammatory skin disease and like ulcerations and things. It's just fascinating. And I think one of the things that really helped me confirm that as well is on my internal medicine rotation. I found that the patients that I really just loved caring for often had just very severe dermatologic conditions. So this one patient that I cared for like 4 weeks, for instance, just had like ulcers all over his body and it was very painful looking. But I would just spend a lot of time just like talking with him, forming connections with him and, coordinating his care, um, basically like on an internal medicine level and also coordinating his care by like consulting other doctors in the hospital. So I think it's really important to just kind of see what cases you're most drawn towards on your rotations as well. Because I think that can be very telling. Okay, so another question is, let's see, so This one's a little bit off topic, but someone did submit this question, so we can talk about it. What activities or experiences would you recommend to someone who's considering pursuing medicine? So it sounds like, pre-med activities or experiences for people considering medicine. Let's see, maybe Atrine, if you want to start.
Is this like a broad encompassing like any experience?
Yeah.
I guess like just if it's like not like the if you're not like interested in like one of the pillars of academia, like or if you are, whether it's like research or like teaching or advocacy or like serving communities, I would just do something you love and are passionate about. Um, I like remember someone's personal statement was like, um, all about like, and I can't recall like exactly what activities she did, but everything was about her identity as being an Asian American woman immigrant in America. And like it was like one of the best personal statements I ever read. And it's because like she like served as a translator in like the hospital because she's just passionate about like communicating care because she had to do that for grandma. And I think like the coolest ones to me is just like whatever you love. Because everybody relatively looks the same on paper with like people did X amount of research for so many years, but what stands out is like why you did it, like what impact you had, and like how it informs your future in medicine. So sorry, like I don't have any tangible examples, but that's because I think the best thing would be to just do something that you genuinely enjoy.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that as well. I do think, there's a lot of check boxes for pre-med. So, volunteering is usually a checkbox, a certain number of shadowing hours, shadowing different positions is another checkbox. Research is becoming more and more of, another box to check. But outside those things, just like Autrine said, the things that really make you stand out are the activities that you're really passionate about and that tell the story of who you are. And they don't have to be related to medicine. So for me, I did a lot of dance and I've been dancing since I was tiny. So that was a big part of my application. And I talked about it a lot on interviews. For somebody else, that might be, art, photography, whatever you love, But those things will definitely come up on interviews. So don't be afraid to put those on your application. Ryan, if you have any advice.
Yeah, I'm just gonna sound like a broken record here. Do what you love, even if it's not in medicine. Uh, for me, I did Japanese drumming, which is called taiko, every year of my undergrad experience, and I also did like a ninth semester. So I essentially did Japanese drumming for 5 years. And my personal statement was an extended metaphor using taiko and like the terminologies, the experiences, the songs, the movements, etc. So that was a really, essential part of my identity that manifested in the personal statement. And then in the work and activities section, I actually had not meant to emphasize it at all, and I guess I didn't, but I tucked away a hobby. I think I had nine of the 14 options that, or you can have, I think, 14 slots unless they've changed it, which maybe they have, but I only did 9 slots because I didn't have enough work and activities to fill everything up, which is, as a tangential point, you do not need to feel like you have to fill up all 14 slots. If you can't, don't force it. But for the work and activity section, I just tucked away one as a hobby, which was I had received a musical instrument from my parents for Christmas, which was called a hangpan. If you haven't heard of it, go look it up on YouTube. You can find some beautiful music to fall asleep to. But I just had mentioned it there and then had like referenced it a couple of times in my interviews. Again, not medically related at all. For a number of interviews, that is the only thing we talked about. We only talked about drumming, or we only talked about the hangpan that I had sort of self-taught myself how to play. And it was to the point that I think there's one professor at Indiana University slash Purdue who he had been wanting to buy a ink pen and had never found someone that he could talk to who had a similar interest. And we spent the entire interview talking about it, looking it up on YouTube. I had a couple of videos from my phone about me learning how to play it. And that was the only thing we talked about. We didn't talk about why I love research. We didn't talk about why I love medicine. We talked about that. And the point I'm trying to make here is that these extra sort of curriculars that are not overtly medically related, not overtly science or anything that, fulfills those check boxes we usually think about, those are the things that make you human. And that's what people want to see in an applicant. They do not want to see someone who checked off, I did 100 research hours, did 100 volunteering hours, I did 100 clinical hours, because it's incredibly obvious. And I've seen applications that look like that, and you can pick them out from a mile away. So do the things that you are incredibly excited about. And if those are medically related and science related, great. Pursue them with a fiery passion. But if they're not, don't feel like you have to suppress them or push them down, because those are the things that make you sort of stand out in the crowd, as both Nicole and Audrey say.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. And then I think a good last question to end on is one that John actually put into the chat, but I think this would be a good one for us all to talk about. So how do you approach, writing your personal statement? And how did you write your statement to show qualities about yourself rather than just telling them the attributes you want to get across? So my response to that in the chat, at least, was that you want to think about different stories that you have. So for instance, maybe you started up a program and you can talk more about that and all the different initiatives that you maybe started, and that can demonstrate leadership, caring for your community, outreach. But you don't necessarily want to say, I'm a leader, I care for my community, I do community outreach. You want to tell it through a story. So I think that's really important. And then it's also very important to not only get those qualities across, but also answer the question they're asking, which is, why do you want to go into medicine and why do you want to be a doctor specifically? So definitely do not skip that, because I've seen a lot of different personal statements that are great, but they don't really answer that question directly. Yeah. Atrine, do you have any advice?
The personal statement was like one of the hardest essays I ever had to write. Because you have to like write about yourself, and I don't like doing that. And I think my best way my mentor like taught me to write it, and I try to like disseminate this 'cause I thought it made a lot of sense, was to view it like a hero's journey. So like like the first paragraph, it's not like a must framework. Every personal statement looks different, but like my first paragraph was like setting the stage, like the hero's like born, like what was the first thing that made the hero want to do medicine, and then the next like two-ish are like the things that like kind of built upon that and the lessons learned along the way through like the experiences that you did, and then a paragraph after that's like where you are today, like what are you up to, and like that conclusion, and like what has made it foundational for you to just want to apply to med school and be a doctor. um and lastly, like what is your vision, like what do you want to do 10, 20, 30 years from now, um whatever that organically would look like. I think the hardest thing was meeting that 5,300 character count. I don't know if it's the same. I just have that in my brain. I think the best way, like me and some of my friends did it, was we just wrote our life story from like birth to like now, and it would be like 10 pages long, and then like cut the fat so that you could like kind of get your ideas down on paper. And I think through it, you'll kind of get a sense of like it actually, you'll probably learn a lot about yourself too through doing that. But I would also, if you're applying this cycle, like start now. If you're not, like start in advance. It takes a lot longer than you would think. It's not like an essay you want to procrastinate. And I also would recommend like being delicate about who would look at it. Like I was pretty protective over who would read my personal statement, so I limited it to current medical students that I knew from my research team or and so forth, or my family, so that it was my truth. Like they may not give me the best like grammatical feedback because they're, it's two lovely immigrant parents, but they can call me out if it just does not look like me. So um, I would also just be intentional about your reviewers as well.
Yeah, really good tips. Ryan, anything else?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think there are a ton of different ways to approach it, as Audrey just mentioned. So there are, bunches of frameworks you can find online in videos or whatnot. But the one thing that is consistent advice that I've heard across the board is to be genuine. You want this story to be truly and authentically you, and how you tell that story is therefore dictated by your experiences. So, in some circumstances, the frameworks that you see from other people can work incredibly well for your story, but in some other instances, your story might need to be told a different way. So, find something that you think makes the most sense for you and your story and apply it that way. To give an example of how I approached it, I think I took a step back and first was like, okay, if people are reading this personal statement to see, why I went into medicine and why I should, be selected for their program over the hundreds of amazing applications that they'll be reading before and after mine, how do I make it so that they remember mine? And I think the way that I've thought about that is that you want this to be an emotional experience. You want reading it and telling it, referring to your story, reading and telling your story to be an emotional experience. And the advice that I give with people as they, write their, conclusions or whatnot is that you have to leave the reader with what I call an emotional gut punch reaction. You don't want them to be reading your personal statement and then go, nice, pass it along to the next and start the next one. You want them, after reading your essay, to take a moment of pause, to be like, wow, this person just touched on the fiber of humanity here, or, the philosophical implications of what was just said run deep. You want them to take a moment of awe after that essay. And so finding a way that you can weave in your personal emotions, everything on the spectrum doesn't always have to be, the roses and sunshine of what medicine is about. Everything that goes into your experience, emotionality and being genuine, I think are the two things that really stand central to an excellent personal statement. So unfortunately, that's not probably the most, formulaic advice that one can give, but I hope it serves people well as they start that. And to Audrine's point, you will write many, many drafts of this essay. Make sure to keep them all because you never know if like a sentence or a phrase in draft number two will help you in draft number 40. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think both of you guys had great and valuable advice. That is all of the questions that were pre-submitted, but I will open it up to the floor because I know we still have 10 minutes left. If anybody has any additional questions for me or any of the panelists, feel free to, unmute yourself. You can also put it in the chat. I'll just give you guys a few minutes to think about it.
I guess in the meantime, if I can provide some unsolicited advice for people as they, start to navigate this question, I think that this session is about, which is like to medicine or not to medicine. I think the best way is to just give it a shot. Try it out. Go find the clinical person to shadow. Go talk to people. Start small. Find someone to talk to, and if things still look, really interesting, really promising, increase, the level of energy and commitment you put to it until you get to the point that you're like shadowing or whatnot. So don't don't just like jump into the deep end and shadow people off the bat. But incrementally invest your time and energy as you start to get more interest and more passion confirming this is the thing for you. Because that is, how you start to narrow down your options and find out what your future will look like.
Yeah, really good advice. And just building off that too, I do want to say it's important to also think about, other potential careers in healthcare. Not everyone who's interested in science and medicine becomes a doctor. So, there's PAs, physician assistants, there's NPs, nurse practitioners. There's a wide variety of different medical practitioners. There's also, you can go into radiology, become like an ultrasound tech without going to medical school. So just make sure to look into those kind of other healthcare specialties as well. And then one question that Sophia is asking is, what did you guys do in your gap year, if you had one, and any gap year advice? Audrine, if you want to start.
I took 3 gap years. They weren't really particularly planned. It was kind of a mix of like COVID and I wasn't doing too hot on the MCAT, so I had to take it multiple times. But through that, I was doing clinical research. I had a unique experience where I was like both a researcher and in the clinic, so it got to count as like 2 entries on AMCAS, which was a big help for me. And because I was doing both like research, and like being at the bedside. I also like tutored, and I was like tutoring already. So I just kind of kept that going and um, very sparsely volunteered at my county food bank. All these I just chose because they like seemed like stuff I wanted to do, and they pretty much fit like like what I probably want to end up doing someday. So, um, but it's everybody's gap year story is different. Like mine's gonna probably look sound different from everyone else's.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. Ryan, did you have any gap years?
I had a gap semester. So I did 9 semesters for my undergrad because I was doing like 2 degrees. But in my gap semester, I essentially did like full-time volunteer research and then some of the clinical shadowing on the side too. The best advice for gap years is to, pursue things of interest to you and make sure that they're productive interests. The worst thing that you could do is take a gap year and have kind of nothing to show for it. So programs are not against gap years at all. In fact, there are some, such as UCSF, that almost seem to take people with more life experience and therefore those who have taken gap years. And there's certainly an argument for that for people as they enter medical training to be more well versed with what life can throw at you. But just make sure that it's something productive. You don't, I guess I've never really seen someone with an unproductive gap year, but just make sure it's productive. That's the best advice.
Yeah, I agree with both Autry and Ryan. I took 2 gap years before medical school, partially also because I wasn't doing so hot on the MCAT, so I had to retake it. But also it just gave me a lot of time to really consider medicine um, in a way where I didn't feel so rushed. Because in pre-med, like in undergrad, there was always like looking forward to the next thing, like studying for the next test. I always felt like I just had to keep my head down and kind of get through it. But in your gap year, you will definitely have like more time to think about if you really want to pursue medicine, and also more time just to, live life outside of pre-med classes. So I thought that was really great as well. But things that I did during my gap year was just continue work on this nonprofit that I've been very passionate about. And then I also just worked like odd jobs. Like I worked as a Starbucks barista for a little bit while I was studying for the MCAT. So there's plenty to do for sure. And then it looks like we may have time to answer this last question. And let's see. It says, why did you choose MD over other medical practitioners? Autry, if you want to go.
I guess like I don't know, like I don't know how unique. Maybe more people may resonate with this. I'm not sure. I kind of knew most of my life I wanted to go into medicine just because I had a pretty big family event that happened that pulled me into medicine, wanting to treat patients. And I think like wanting to be an MD was primarily so that I could be someone's doctor. I could prevent the suffering that like my family had to go through. That's like kind of how I viewed physicians like growing up, and I had a lot of scientific curiosity paired with it. So I also wanted to have some kind of like research element with my life, and I just feel like being an MD clinician was like the path that could make that possible. The surgery part came along the way. I like had a billion specialties I was interested in before I settled on orthopedic surgery. So I think that may was more developed in my gap years. But I think like the root of like why I wanted to be an MD was for like the sake of like being the person who had like full agency over someone's care.
Okay, thank you. And then Ryan, any advice?
Don't know that I could put it any better than Autry just did. I think, the pairing of the medical interest and the scientific background behind it and really spurred my interest in pursuing the dual degree. I will say though that the healthcare system would absolutely collapse if we only had MDs. So nurses, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, technicians who are doing different scans or whatnot. Every single one of those people is incredibly vital for the infrastructure to work properly. And in some instances, and actually many instances, those are the people that have the most face time with patients. Those are the people who see the patients more minutes out of the day, who are more in tune with what's going on with them in their care. And that is why in your clinical training, never, ever question it if a nurse says something's going on with a patient, because those are the people that know truly what's going on. So I think there are a bunch of different ways to think about the different medical specialties and different kind of options in terms of medical career pathways. Every single one of them is incredibly vital to it. And I think it's more so a matter of, where are you looking to invest your time and energies? Is it in the sort of development and crafting of a treatment plan? Is it the administration of that plan? Is it, the supportive care that makes those plans and executions possible in a reality? Every single one of those elements is vital. So I think, as you progress on your journey, think about where in that sort of massive framework you see yourself fitting in the most.
Yeah, you guys had such a fantastic response. I really have nothing to add to that. But thank you all so much for joining. I hope that you got a lot of, good advice and tips from tonight's section. Please join for later Med Mentor Monday Zooms. We will continue to do many of these to offer advice on just different sections of, applying to medicine and life in med school. All right, and thank you, panelists. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.